Each new pick Donald Trump makes reveals something about US policy. Ian Bremmer is with me, head of the Eurasia Group. Ian, we've got so much to talk about. I know how you like things in an orderly fashion. So I've put an agenda for us to discuss. Let's start with Marco Rubio as such. Marco Rubio, interesting choice. What do you make of it, and how far Rubio and Trump will coalesce around common views?
Well, only Secretary of State that will have ever been directly sanctioned by China. And I think especially as the Chinese economy is in the doldrums right now, this is a big hit. They're worried about a generally more hawkish orientation of Trump and his foreign policy and his economic team. And Elon Musk is kind of their only hope. Also, of course, Marco is going to be very strongly pro-Israel. Just as every other appointee of Trump has been, and Trump's own orientation, which really isolates the U.S. further on this issue globally, but is clearly where Trump is going. And then finally, very hawkish on Venezuela and on Cuba, will be more focused on Latin America than the Biden administration or others have been historically.
Does Trump care about Cuba and Latin America?
Not much, which means that if you're Secretary of State and that's a big part of your portfolio, you'll have a lot of room to run on that one. Ukraine
and the EU, I suppose we could put that under our agenda item as the transatlantic relationship. Look, we don't really know. Ukraine, we don't know how far he's going to go to solve it in a day. The EU, I guess we have to wait and see. You know, his bark is usually worse than his bite.
Well, Richard, the $61 billion that the Americans did offer to the Ukrainians, the last major tranche, that wouldn't have been approved if Trump hadn't given the thumbs up. So he definitely thinks that too much money is being given, but he doesn't want the Ukrainians to lose. He doesn't want Zelensky to be overthrown. He does value Ukrainian national security, just not as much as Biden. What he doesn't value is coordinating with American allies. So, I mean, Trump's inclination will be to get on the phone directly with Zelensky and Putin and say, here's the deal. Right. And of course, American allies are deeply discomfited by that. And it could lead to a split inside Europe with some leaders, people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, but maybe even Giorgia Meloni from Italy, saying, I got to work with Trump more than I have to hold a hard line collectively on Russia.
Arguably, Orban is more powerful than Scholz, who's a lame duck, arguably going to lose the next election.
Well, sure. Since that election's coming in just a few months, I would say that's probably true. But arguably, Orban is less powerful than the next incoming chancellor of Germany, probably Friedrich Merz, who is more aligned on issues like Russia and NATO with most of the other Europeans.
On economic fronts, the Fed, because you are indeed the expert for all seasons, on the Fed, Powell says he's not going anywhere. The economy is doing better than anybody really expected. At the end of the day, how does a Donald Trump not manage to ruin it?
Well, ruin it for who? I mean, we're going to have a stronger dollar. You've seen the markets rally. The challenge will be for other countries in particular. The U.S. is a much larger percentage of the global economy than the rest of the G7 is now compared to the last 20, 30 years. So if Trump is going to lean into things like tariffs on the Europeans, on the Japanese, he's got a lot more leverage to do that. They're going to look a lot more willing to capitulate than they have historically. So it's possible that Trump barks pretty hard, and then he ends up with a lot of individual wins. He does have more leverage, but if he ends up breaking things, everyone's going to get hurt. So the question will not be what his opening salvo is. The question is what happens when they get into negotiations.
Have you seen anything in his appointments that sort of has raised an eyebrow? I mean, that's out of the kilter of what we expected, in a sense of there's no loonies, there's no madmen or women, there's no weirdos, there's no extraneous, not yet anyway. It's experienced politicians and diplomats and experts who may have a different point of view.
Certainly Stefanik as UN ambassador and Huckabee as ambassador to Israel is a particularly pro-right-wing Israel policy that goes even beyond what we saw from Biden, even beyond what we saw from the first Trump term, but still not out of the ordinary, Richard. I think the only thing we've seen so far out of the ordinary is that before Trump made any cabinet appointments, he personally posted that that Pompeo and Haley were not going to get a position, which he didn't need to do. He could have just not given them a position. He wanted to make it known that those guys are not loyal and they can go look someplace else.
You're loyal, sir. I'm grateful to you. We will have many more meetings in the years ahead. Thank you, sir. I'm grateful.
Good to see you, Richard.